You're listening to the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Bill McIntyre, and it's time for this week's Long Island News, the news show that talks to newsmakers from Nassau and Suffolk County that matter to Long Island and Long Islanders like you. So each week, we'll have a conversation about issues that affect all of us. I live on Long Island. I'm a concerned citizen. And, well, this week, we need to delve a little deeper into a conversation that we've all been hearing about lately and need more details on. I'm talking about monkeypox. Our guest today is Dr. Alan Bulbin, an infectious disease expert at St. Francis Hospital and Heart Center, which is part of Catholic Health Services of Long Island. Dr. Bulbin, welcome to this week's Long Island News.
Thank you so much for having me. My pleasure.
Oh, I know you're busy, and I really appreciate the time you take to talk to us. So we were just kidding about, well, of all the things that we expected to come down the pike, monkeypox was not on my list.
I would agree. I certainly share that view.
Yeah, it just seemed like so out of the blue. But can you tell me how we came to where we are now?
Well, I think it's just another example of the changing planet and the human population growth and contact with what's called zoonoses, or infections that usually are only found in certain animal species, but when they cross over into humans, is when we run into trouble, where it's a novel or a new pathogen that very few people have ever been exposed to. Mm-hmm. Nobody's immune or has lost their immunity. And with this encroachment into environments, into larger populations, suddenly we have worldwide spread. Right. So I think this is just another example of what seemingly is now becoming a common occurrence.
Right. Just a very good illustration and indicator that the world is getting smaller.
Agreed. Right. Totally agree.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when it was a big deal for us to even hear a story about Ebola.
Absolutely.
And lately in the news, it pops up every once in a while. And I think there have actually been some cases here, haven't there?
Well, fortunately, Ebola hasn't really evolved into a major global issue. It's still pretty well localized to where you would expect. It's regional. It's in Africa, and not the same type of virus that can spread more easily and readily to suddenly pop up outside of its confines where you would expect to find it. And that's really the story with monkeypox. Traditionally, this was a disease only found rarely, very rarely, in parts of Africa. Mm-hmm. Very similar to smallpox, which, of course, was eradicated with a global vaccine effort years ago. But now, outside of Africa, in many, many countries, we now see this new infection, this rare disease that is now affecting general populations globally. So. Mm-hmm. Things have certainly changed in that regard.
Right. Okay. Well, they've got me a list of questions here, but so one of them was how. Let's see. We're all hearing about monkeypox and how it was declared a public health emergency.
Yes.
Of international concern. Should we here on Long Island be concerned about it?
Well, I think yes, we should be concerned. Education, knowledge is power. So being able to recognize a case or somebody who might have a case of this, to identify and isolate somebody quickly is a better position than perhaps where we've been in the past. Mm-hmm. So although it's a different virus, completely different than COVID, and the way it's spread is completely different, and it's certainly, I don't think, poses the same kind of threat as a virus similar to the virus that causes COVID by any means. Right. Nonetheless, understanding where this has come from, where we are, and where we could be going, and identifying what a case looks like, and being vigilant and aware of somebody who might be sick is only going to be helpful to prevent, spread and limit this, and maybe even be able to end it before it really becomes, even worse. So,
right. So
I think it's just putting it in perspective, but definitely having some concern and being aware is always the first step.
Right. And along with a good dose of common sense, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, yeah.
Absolutely.
So now one of the things we hear is that monkeypox is, first of all, does it actually have something to do with monkeys?
Well, unfortunately, I think it got its name because it was first seen in monkeys in the late 50s in a lab, a group of lab animals that were actually being used to study the polio vaccine suddenly came out with this, the skin eruption and, sick. So they found this virus for the first time in this population of monkeys. It was a pox-like infection with skin lesions in the monkeys. So monkeypox is where it started its notoriety. But ultimately, it probably is the reservoir where this virus lives normally. Mm-hmm. It's not fully understood, but it's felt probably to be in small animals or rodents in certain parts of Central and West Africa. Okay. So its name is monkey because that's where it was first seen, but it's really an inherent virus that lives and doesn't make those small mammals, rodents, sick, but they serve as the area that other people can first become sick if they come into contact.
Wow.
In a rainforest, for example, in Africa is really where it was. These sporadic cases were first seen, and whether the virus was able to adapt further or change just enough to become more able to be spread instead of from just animal to human. But now, as we know, from human to human, that's where we are with this virus. It's definitely being seen from person to person contact, close contact. Intimate contact is really how it's spread, far different than what we've seen in the past.
Right. So is this the first time that we assume that people have been getting this?
Well, the first example of this viral infection outside of Africa was in 2003. In the Midwest, there was an outbreak actually related to infected prairie dogs who were being adopted as pets. And those prairie dogs were intermingled with some African rodents in wherever they were being stored.
Oh my.
The prairie dogs then got infected, and then they started infecting people who were adopting them as pets. So it kind of spread from there, again, animal to human, to probably about 80 people when it was all said and done. But the CDC stepped in. They were able to identify it, control it, and it really never went anywhere. And there really wasn't any human to human spread in 2003. It was really just the animal to the people around the animals.
Right.
That's 2003. So that's a little different than where we are now, where suddenly these cases are being seen outside of any travel. We call that community spread, where, somebody pops up with this infection and they never were in Africa or near anybody who was traveling to Africa. So it's kind of moved beyond that to person community spread.
Wow.
Totally different than, 20 years ago.
Right. But it's an interesting progression in 20 years.
Absolutely.
So we've been hearing that this thing is most common in the LGBT community, specifically men who have sex with other men. But anyone can get it, though, right?
But that is definitely the point. I mean, it may have really started in that population because, again, it's spread with close, intimate contact. Somebody who has a lesion, a blister, or a pustule, these skin lesions, which could be very few or very many, depending on the individual. But that's really how you get it. Some close time spent with another individual who either doesn't realize they have it or is somehow in denial that these new skin lesions mean anything. And so it's really skin to skin contact is one of the main ways it's spread. So perhaps in that population, it's really been able to take off, but by no means is that where it's limited. Anybody is at risk for getting this infection. So that's really the take home is everyone should be aware of of what it looks like and how you can get it.
Right.
And we'll be better off.
And just because we've identified a community that it may be more show up more in does not mean that it's going to stay within that community, and that anybody could be get in contact and have that.
That is absolutely correct, and that's a really important take-home message. Is anybody, including children, including older individuals, including immunocompromised individuals, because those are the ones who, if they get this, might be at higher risk for a complication or more severe disease. Fortunately, for the most part, this has been kind of a mild disease, a mild illness that, for the most part, is self-limited, that does go away without complication after, it usually lasts 2 to 4 weeks. And in that time, you may feel sick, you may have some issues, but you're going to get over it. But then factor in somebody else, as is the case with a lot of viral infections, who's at risk for doing worse, immunocompromised children, older individuals. So as is with any infection-related advice in that group, they need to be more vigilant. And that's where we need to be more vigilant about protecting them as well. So absolutely, anybody could be at risk for this if you come into contact, prolonged close contact, skin to skin, with somebody who is either realizing they have this or has yet to figure it out.
Right. Well, just to remind our listening audience that we're speaking with Dr. Alan Bulbin, the infectious disease expert at St. Francis Hospital and Heart Center, which is part of Catholic Health Services of Long Island, and we're talking about monkeypox. So there's another question here. It says, "Is it like chickenpox?"
Well, although they have pox in the name, they are two different viruses. The monkeypox virus is structurally and physically different than varicella, the chickenpox virus. And they are totally different diseases in the way they present and who they affect. At some point in the illness, the skin lesions, the little vesicles or pustules, as they evolve, at some point, it could look like chickenpox. It might be something to consider when, for example, you see a patient who has an unexplained rash. You might say, well, this could be chickenpox, but the presentation, the illness overall is definitely different. And over time or with further testing, you could definitely differentiate or distinguish chickenpox from monkeypox for sure.
Right. I mean, I'm from the generation where they used to have chickenpox parties.
Right.
Two kids on the block would get chickenpox, and the whole neighborhood would just say, "Okay, let's just put them all together and get it over with at one time." And one of the results of that is often, as we grew up, there'd be a kid on the block who would have had a mark on his face or on his arm, and his answer was, "I picked a pock."
Right. Exactly. Well, that's kind of the notorious aspect of any pox-like illness. From age-old smallpox to even monkeypox. If you had just an overwhelming number of these lesions, of these blisters of this outbreak, this skin outbreak, right? It could be scarring. It could definitely leave the pox mark as a reminder of a prior infection, and that's where it gets its name. But certainly, the whole idea of creating some kind of herd immunity, as it used to be thought of way back when with chickenpox, I think we, have moved on from that kind of view with these infections for sure. Yes. Yes. For sure.
It was a fairly well thought out idea, and and it did work.
Sure.
But as long as the chickenpox wasn't a deadly thing, people felt, pretty safe doing that. Now, you were talking before about this. What other symptoms are there besides the actual pox on it?
Right. Sure. So usually, if you've been exposed, the incubation, the time between exposure and when you first have symptoms could be anywhere from 3 to even up to 21 days. On average, it's probably more like 8 or 9 days. And in that time, at 8 to 9 days, you may first start to feel flu-like, have fever, aches, headaches, sore throat. And then the rash may first show up. Or it's variable, or you might just have a rash without all those other systemic kind of symptoms. But on average, the rash begins around the same time or a little bit after some of those flu-like symptoms begin. And then the rash has kind of its own evolutionary progress, where it might start out as just small bumps and kind of flat areas, but then over time start to look like a blister and then become larger, and then might even have a little dent in the center, or what's called umbilication. And then ultimately they scab over and then drop off, and you have new skin form where they were. And that's about a 2 to 4 week endeavor as it evolves.
Well, besides being very uncomfortable, it does it painful?
Right. Some people have described pain. Other people may have no change around the lesion. Some people describe them as itchy. So I think painful has been described, but not as common as either very little discomfort or itching. And you have to realize it may be even a few small lesions. It doesn't have to be kind of what we picture, even like chickenpox. Oh, somebody who's covered with these blisters all over. It could be just a few lesions. It could be limited to areas like the genitals or around the rectum, or even on hands, the palms or soles, or just the face. So it may be a little bit harder to perceive. And certainly I would urge anyone who has a new skin lesion or is feeling sick with even 1 or 2 evolving blisters to definitely get seen and have that checked out. Because there is testing. It is easily accomplished. It is readily available. It just takes a swab. We're so used to, it's literally the same swab as a COVID swab, but instead of sticking it up somebody's nose and getting a nasopharyngeal, a nasal specimen, you're just taking the same swab and kind of getting that blister or that bump, that papule, and just sampling it and sending that off for the same testing. Most labs now can do it. It's a PCR test and can identify the presence of the virus. So I urge anybody who's even questioning a new skin eruption or not feeling well and having even a few lesions to for sure be evaluated. Go to your healthcare provider and get checked out.
Right. And again, a reminder for the listening audience, we're talking to Dr. Alan Bulbin from St. Francis Hospital and Heart Center, and he's the infectious disease expert. So he's giving you the heads up here. Now, I have the real question is monkeypox deadly?
Yeah. Fortunately, as I said before, this has been so far, a mild illness for the most part. Certainly annoying in the sense that you would definitely have to isolate. If you are identified as having this, you do need to isolate. You need to stay away from other individuals, and that could be for a couple weeks or longer until those skin lesions have healed. But aside from that, there really hasn't been very rare deaths reported at all. It's survival of literally 99% so far from what we've seen. Right. So it's probably because of the type of the subset of virus that kind of left Africa, so to speak, and started affecting the global population was the subset, the variant, if you will, of monkeypox that is not as severe, not as aggressive as, say, some of its cousins that hopefully stay in Africa. But so the watchword is it's been mild. But again, that holds true for otherwise healthy younger individual. Right. But somebody who is not so fortunate, who has an immunocompromising condition, if you have cancer or are on immunosuppressive therapy, drugs that suppress your immune system, or certainly children, younger children especially, or somebody who has a severe dermatitis, for example, people with severe eczema. If you can imagine, if they get this virus, it kind of can overwhelm their skin and maybe put them at risk for other complications. So those subsets, those immunocompromised individuals or older individuals are always out there that we're trying to protect, because, if they get this, then the statistics may change. They're just at higher risk for a complication. But fortunately, so far, what we've been seeing has been just a mild disease that hasn't led to a lot of, if any, real mortality.
Right. It's also now in a new subset of customers, so to speak.
Yes.
So we're talking about this monkeypox. If it stays the way it is, what happens if this could morph too? I understand when most of viruses, I'm looking for the word, mutate, right? When they mutate, they usually mutate to the benign side, but every so often they mutate to the, we're going to kill everybody in our path side.
Right, become more pathogenic or more virulent, more severe. Right. I think we're all used to this conversation now from COVID, right?
But this is true of all of them, right? So this could also be true of monkeypox. It could mutate.
It could. We haven't seen that yet. Fortunately, one advantage, at least to the human population, I'll say, is that if you're over 50, you more than likely received the smallpox vaccine as a kid, as an infant. So, although that immunity that you established from that vaccine years ago may wane over time, I still think there's some relative protection, some inherent immunity sitting somewhere, and so I think that's at least one advantage. So this may very well remain kind of sequestered in a younger population, nothing's absolute, but so if you're under 50, you may be at higher risk because, there's no baseline immunity to this. If you've had a smallpox vaccine, you may be fortunate to still have some cross-reacting immunity that, would, even if you were exposed and became ill from this, it would probably still remain a very mild event.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So I mean, that begs the whole question of, the vaccine. And that's what's been a little bit of a tough early road here is having an available vaccine for people who are at risk.
Yeah.
So
now they said there was concern with the vaccine. They said it did seem to appear fairly quickly. Did we already have one to fight this?
Sure. There's the government has a stockpile of smallpox vaccine. So it's essentially a supply of smallpox vaccine that cross reacts, that has provides immunity against monkeypox. So it's just, how big is your stockpile, and who's making the vaccine, and how readily available is it? And that's just been one of the shortcomings so far, is there's probably just not enough of it to go around. When, yes, it's the same story. The U.S. is putting in their orders, but you have Western Europe, you have all other parts of the world who are now requesting supply of this vaccine. And there are two different vaccines available, but the safest and the most recommended is this. It's called Jynneos with a J, which is easier to give than the old fashioned vaccine, and is certainly safer overall. But there's only one worldwide manufacturer of this vaccine. And if you can imagine, now with the supply and demand, equation changing completely against what they felt was probably, a worldwide disease that was eradicated, and will just, in case smallpox shows up as a bioterrorism issue, how much vaccine is the world ever going to really need? But guess what? Now we need it for monkeypox. So catching up and adjusting, and maybe having other manufacturers like here in the United States step up and make it as well, to have a larger supply and get it out there to the highest risk groups, is really where there's a little bit of a gap. I think the initial campaign to start vaccinating high-risk people in about a month ago was initially well received, but the supply was promptly diminished. And now if you want to refer somebody for a vaccine, they're going to be put on a waiting list. And it's really a little bit of a tougher road to know how long it's going to take to actually get it. So that's one thing that our system could definitely improve on as we go forward.
Well, Dr. Bulbin, I want to thank you very much for coming on and, enlightening us. And as I do with most guests, I'm going to make you promise that you'll come back and talk to us again in the future.
Sure, my pleasure.
It's a great topic. I mean, infectious diseases scares the hell out of me, but I'm glad you're working on it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That's a lot to cover. But anyway, we want to thank you very much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Anytime.
We'll talk to you soon. Okay.
Okay. Have a great day.
You too. And the clock on the wall is already yelled, and it's time for this week's Long Island News to move on out of here. We want to thank Dr. Alan Bulbin from St. Francis Heart Hospital, the infectious disease expert, for enlightening us on monkeypox. Remind you, you can listen to this week's Long Island News every Friday at 3 o'clock right here on 90.3 WHPC.